All right, guys, this one is intense, so buckle up. Iran's leadership just threatened to assassinate the sitting president of the United States. And President Trump did not just brush it off. He went on Truth Social and basically told the entire Iranian government that if they try it, it is over for them. We're talking about a direct, public, no ambiguity threat of a response that would flatten the country. Let's break down exactly what happened, what was actually said, and what it means going forward. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's Ryan on the Max Afterburner channel, former F-15E combat fighter pilot, F-16 Thunderbird pilot. I've flown the Boeing 737, the Airbus A220, flown airliners for many years, and I've been following this Iran conflict closely for months now because it just keeps escalating in ways that genuinely surprise me. And this latest development, the assassination threats against the president and his response to them, this is a big one. So stick around, I'll walk you through the timeline, the intelligence behind it, exactly what President Trump said in response, and then at the end, I'll give you my take as a professional pilot and as an American on what all of this means. Let's get into it. So let's start with the background here, because the roots of this go back further than a lot of people realize. Iran has held a grudge against President Trump specifically going back to 2020. When as president, he ordered the drone strike that killed Iranian Major General Qasem Soleimani, who was one of the most powerful military figures in the entire Iranian regime, running their Quds force. Iran vowed revenge for that strike back then, and that vow has apparently never gone away. Fast forward to Trump's return to office, and even before this current war with Iran kicked off, there were already reports of specific, credible assassination plots being tracked by U.S. intelligence, going all the way back to his campaign in 2024, when his team said they'd been briefed on real and specific threats coming out of Iran aimed at destabilizing the country and taking him out. Now, layer on top of that everything that's happened over the last several months in this broader war. Back in February, the U.S. and Israel launched a coordinated strike campaign against Iran, and that campaign actually killed Iran's supreme leader at the time, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, in one of the opening strikes. His son, Mujtaba Khamenei, has since taken over as the new supreme leader, and by most accounts, he lost family in those same strikes, so you can imagine the level of personal motivation for revenge running through the highest levels of the Iranian government right now. And just this month, in July, we saw Khamenei's funeral. And at that funeral, mourners were photographed carrying banners that literally read, in plain English, "Kill Trump." That's not some vague rhetorical threat buried in a state media broadcast. That's a direct, explicit banner at a massive public funeral for the former supreme leader. And it didn't stop there. Reports came out that Israel shared intelligence with the United States, indicating Iran had developed a new, specific plan to assassinate President Trump. This wasn't some old, recycled threat. This was described as fresh intelligence about an active plot. And President Trump himself addressed this directly at a press conference at the NATO summit in Ankara, Turkey, saying that he's aware he's on basically every list Iran has, and that so far he's been fortunate, but acknowledging that luck doesn't necessarily hold forever. I want you to sit with that for a second. That's the sitting president of the United States, standing in front of reporters at a NATO summit, openly acknowledging that multiple hostile intelligence services and terror networks currently have him marked as a target. So here's where it escalated to the next level. In response to all of this, the Treasury Department went ahead and sanctioned an individual described as an alleged Iranian financier connected to these threats, essentially targeting the money behind the plot. Iran's response to the sanctions was to claim that this new financial measure actually violated the preliminary ceasefire deal the two countries had struck the month before, which just shows you how fragile this entire truce has been this whole time. And then, late on a Friday night, President Trump posted directly to Truth Social with what might be one of the most direct, unambiguous threats I've ever seen a sitting American president make in public. He wrote that 1,000 missiles were locked and loaded and aimed at the Islamic Republic of Iran, with thousands more ready to immediately follow should the Iranian government act on its threat to assassinate the sitting president of the United States. And he made it clear this wasn't just talk. He said he'd already given direct orders to the U.S. military to be prepared to respond if anything happens to him. Let's talk about what that actually means from a military planning standpoint, because I think this is where my background as a pilot gives me a little bit of insight into what's really being described here. When a president says the military has been directed to be ready to respond immediately and overwhelmingly to a specific triggering event, that's not just rhetoric. That typically means there are actual standing plans, actual assets already positioned, actual rules of engagement pre-briefed and ready to execute the moment that trigger occurs. Given everything we've already covered on this channel about what's been used in this war, the GBU-57 bunker busters that hit Fordo, the directed energy weapons taking down drones, the reverse-engineered Lucas drones, the naval strikes on Bandar Abbas, you have to assume that a response of the scale being described, decimating and destroying all areas of Iran, in the president's own words, would draw on basically every capability we've talked about on this channel, and then some. This wouldn't be a limited, symbolic strike package like we've seen in prior rounds of this conflict. This would be described as a full, overwhelming response aimed at ending Iran's ability to function as a hostile state entirely. I also want to point out, because I think it's important context, that this isn't the first time President Trump has made this kind of public warning about what would happen if Iran successfully carried out an assassination. Going back to early last year, he told reporters that if Iran ever did it, in his words, they get obliterated and there won't be anything left. And earlier this year, in a separate interview, he said that if anything ever happened to him, the whole country would essentially be destroyed. So this most recent Truth Social post isn't some new one-off outburst. It's actually the most detailed, most specific version yet of a warning he's been repeating consistently for well over a year now. And I think that consistency actually matters because it signals this isn't an empty threat made in a moment of anger. This is a deliberate, repeated, consistent deterrence message aimed directly at the Iranian leadership. Now, I also want to address the security side of this because it's worth remembering just how serious the threat environment around President Trump has already been, well before this latest Iranian plot. He survived being struck by a bullet at a campaign rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, back in the summer of 2024. Later that same year, a man was found hiding with a rifle outside one of his golf properties in Florida. And then this year, there was a shooting incident at the White House Correspondents Association dinner. In response to all of that, his security team has significantly ramped up protective measures, including things like bulletproof glass barriers at public speaking events and an expanded security detail. So when you combine that entire pattern of real physical threats against him over the last couple years with this new specific Iranian assassination intelligence, you start to understand why the tone of his response has been as forceful and as absolute as it has been. Let's also talk about the diplomatic side of this, because even in the middle of all this incredibly heated rhetoric, there's still a parallel diplomatic track running. Iran's foreign minister reportedly traveled to Oman for talks around the same time all of this was unfolding. And Oman has been acting as a key mediator throughout this entire conflict, going all the way back to earlier negotiation rounds. So you've got this bizarre split screen happening. On one hand, you've got the American president publicly threatening to decimate an entire country in response to an assassination attempt. And on the other hand, you've got Iranian diplomats sitting down with mediators trying to hold together whatever fragile ceasefire framework still exists. That tells you just how complicated and multi-layered this situation has become. It's not purely a shooting war anymore, and it's not purely a diplomatic negotiation either. It's both happening at the exact same time, often within days of each other. I do want to be responsible here and mention that not every claim about Iranian threats against Trump that circulates online turns out to be accurate. Earlier this year, back in January, there was a widely shared claim that Iranian state television had broadcast a direct threat referencing the earlier assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania, and fact-checkers looked into that specific claim and couldn't independently verify that it represented an official direct threat from the Iranian government itself. So I think it's important, especially with a topic this serious, to separate out what's been independently confirmed: the funeral banners, the Israeli intelligence sharing, the Treasury sanctions, the president's own public statements, from claims that are still murky or unverified. Not everything that goes viral about this conflict turns out to be exactly as described. And I think it's important to hold that standard even when the underlying threat itself is very real and very serious. Okay, let me give you my take here as a pilot who has actually flown in combat. And honestly, just as an American watching all of this unfold. Number one, I think the sheer directness of this exchange, an open threat on one side, an open promise of overwhelming total response on the other, tells you just how far outside normal diplomatic and military norms this conflict has already traveled. In more typical international disputes, you don't usually see a head of state publicly naming a specific missile count and directly threatening to level an entire country over Truth Social. The fact that we're at that point tells you the relationship between the U.S. and the current Iranian government has moved well past anything resembling traditional deterrence signaling and into something much more direct and much more personal. Number two, I think this specific threat, an assassination plot aimed at a sitting American president, changes the stakes of this entire war in a way that's different from every other exchange we've covered on this channel. Strikes on nuclear facilities, strikes on naval bases, strikes on shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, as serious as all of that is, it's still, in a strategic sense, within the normal bounds of state-on-state conflict. A credible plot to assassinate a head of state is a different category of escalation entirely. And if the president's own promised response is any indication, an assassination attempt on him personally would likely be treated as justification for the single, most overwhelming military response of this entire war. A response aimed not at degrading specific facilities or specific capabilities, but at ending the Iranian regime's ability to function altogether. Number three, and I think this is honestly the point I want to leave you with, Deterrence only works if the other side genuinely believes you'll follow through. Every single previous statement President Trump has made about this exact scenario, going back over a year now, has been remarkably consistent. And this latest, most specific version of that warning fits right into that same pattern. Whether or not you agree with the tone or the rhetoric, the strategic logic behind it is pretty straightforward. Make the cost of even attempting an assassination so catastrophically high that it removes any incentive to try. Given everything we've seen this military prove it's capable of throughout this conflict, the bunker busters, the directed energy weapons, the precision strikes, I don't think that's an empty threat. And I don't think Iran's leadership thinks it's an empty threat either. All right, that's my breakdown of this latest, incredibly serious escalation. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. Do you think this kind of direct public deterrence messaging actually works to prevent an attack? Or does it risk escalating tensions even further? I want to hear your thoughts. If you found this breakdown valuable, go ahead and hit that like button for me. It genuinely helps get this kind of coverage out to more people. And subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because I'm covering every part of this conflict as it develops. Go ahead and follow me on X, follow me on Instagram. I'm posting pretty much every day, the links in the description. And join the Max Ready Room if you want priority replies during the live streams. I'm doing those pretty much daily right now, given how fast this situation keeps moving. And then check out this video right here. I think you're going to enjoy it. This is Ryan, also known as Max Afterburner, also known as the fighter pilot next door, signing off.